Hello and welcome back. In this episode, we are going to continue taking a look at the Web API, but we're going to focus on how to consume endpoints that the Web API exposes. We'll start off by learning how to use the HTTP client, which is a new mechanism built into the .NET framework that allows you to very simply and very easily create endpoint connections for WCF or REST-based endpoints. Once we learn how to use the HTTP client, we'll learn how to actually make a remote call to hit our endpoint and see how we can return the data back and examine the data that's brought back. So let's go ahead and get started. In a previous episode, we took a look at how to create a self-hosted environment for our Web API. In this episode, we're going to build off of that, and we're actually going to learn how to consume the Web API's endpoints within our application. And we're going to use a self-hosting example as a startup. So the first thing we want to do if we want to consume a Web API is we want to create a client called the HTTP client. The HTTP client lives in the systemnet HTTP namespace, so let's go ahead and reference that. And we want to go ahead and create a local variable for that. We are in a console application, so I need to read a line so I can wait. So let's go ahead and do console.WriteLine. And we're going to do a write line then a read line just so I simply can wait, because what we're going to do is we're actually going to launch our console application with the other console application, so they're both going to launch simultaneously. And I want to actually invoke the getting of my data manually. I don't want it to just happen at runtime. Otherwise, I'd just have the app run, exit, and leave without me. Also, because this is a console, I do need to do a read line in order to have it wait for the response to come back, because when working with the HTTP client, it's all asynchronous. So now I've got my console read line set up and I've got my HTTP client set up. All I need to do now is actually create a connection to our endpoint. So let's do HTTP client.get async, and it's going to ask for my URL. In our scenario here, I'm just going to go ahead and hard code it. Colon 8080. We're going to say endpoints episode. And I'm going to go ahead and grab the default get method off of that endpoint. Now I want to say is I want to continue with. So what will happen is once the callback comes back, because this is asynchronous, I want to go ahead and continue. So let's go ahead and say result. And I need to grab my result value out of my object. So we're just going to say result.result. A little redundant, I know. And that is our response. Within our response, we actually want to validate that we didn't get a 404 error or something like that. So we're just going to go ahead and say response.ensure success status code. If this is anything but a success code here, you'll get an exception thrown here, so that's a good thing. And now I actually need to go ahead and read in the content that was actually came back from our message. So we're going to say response.content. So once we create our content, let's go ahead and do read as async, and as you may notice, read as async isn't in my list. The reason for that is it's in the system.net.http.formatting assembly, so we need to add a reference to that. And that is in the extensions. I always forget that. Once I do that, I get my IntelliSense back, and we're going to return. Need to deserialize this as a JSON array. This lives in the system.json assembly. And once I read that in, I again need to do a continue with. And in my read result, all I need to do is actually read in the result and do something useful with it. So say read result.result, again a little bit redundant, I know. Oop. And because it's a console app, I'm just going to for each of the elements in the array. And there you have it. We've written about 10 lines of code. We've created our endpoint connection. We said once we get our connection, let's go ahead and continue with and do this callback. And we're going to grab the result. Ensure that we had success. If we have success, I need to actually grab the content from the message. And to do this, I've set a read as async. And I'm going to continue with, and I'm actually just output everything to the line. So if all goes well, I should be able to run our app and see this work. Before I can do that, I do need to set both projects up as my startup projects, just so I can get them both running simultaneously. Here we go, let's F5 this. So I have my server running. I did not put a breakpoint, so let's go ahead and do that. I have my server running, and I have my consumer running. If I hit F5, or hit enter, excuse me, you can see I was able to hit the result, or hit the endpoint. I got a valid response back, a 200 response. That's good. It means this won't throw an exception. I now have read in the content. I have an array. And if I let this run, you'll see that it'll read in my 3 objects, or 3 lines. And here's the JSON output for each of those 3 objects. Now, of course, if I wanted to deserialize this using the JSON deserializer, I can do that, and I would have a fully populated object model. But as you can see, consuming an ASP.NET Web API endpoint is very simple and straightforward. Just takes a little bit of code. You got to be familiar with the async design style or coding style that's becoming prevalent within the Microsoft stack lately, and how to use the task namespaces. So I hope you learned something, and until next time.